Now, Turkey's Interior Ministry says more than 1,000 people have been arrested since the start of anti-government demonstrations in the country, the largest in more than a decade. Tens of thousands of protesters again took to the streets across Turkey on Sunday, defying a ban on rallies. They are angry at the arrest of Ekrem Imamoglu, the mayor of Istanbul and a key rival of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Demonstrators accuse the Turkish president of trying to get rid of a major opponent ahead of elections in 2028. Imamoglu was taken into custody pending a trial on corruption charges. Now, with further protests expected in major cities, here are some people speaking out on the streets of Istanbul.
Justice must be served. It cannot be this way, and it cannot continue like this. But we don't know what to do either. Everyone is conflicted right now. They don't know what to do, they don't know how to act. If I go to a protest, it's a crime. But if I don't, it's a problem.
Support for Imamoglu will increase. Instead of going to prison, he's on the path to the presidency. They put the man who committed no crime in prison. If he had committed a crime, then fine. You know, President Erdogan went to prison for 3 months in 1999. Imamoglu is on this path right now. We will protest like this. We can do it without breaking things left and right, without harming the security forces by using our democratic rights. Shouting and screaming, breaking things is not the solution either.
And for more, we're going to talk to DW correspondent Julia Hahn, who is in Istanbul. Julia, just listening to people there, you can hear the defiance. And indeed, demonstrators continue to protest despite a ban on such rallies. We know that they're coming out in support of Ekrem Imamoglu, but is there more fueling these protests?
Well, I think it's a mix of factors that are driving these protests right now. There is clearly a massive sense of injustice and unfairness. People think that the judicial system is being weaponized by the government against a powerful and popular opposition politician that is Ekrem Imamoglu, and if that can be done to him, it could be done to anyone, basically. That is what people have been telling me quite a lot in recent days. And then there is a general sense of frustration with President Erdogan and his government and how they're running the country, a perceived lack of personal freedoms, especially among young people, and many university students have joined these protests. And then, of course, also the ailing economy here in the country. People have been suffering from a massive cost of living crisis, particularly in the past 3 years since the end of the pandemic. And I think a lot of things have been building up here, and they are now being unleashed onto the streets.
Julia, as you're talking, we're seeing images of the police using tear gas to disperse demonstrators. Can you give us a sense of what tactics authorities might be using to deter people from coming out?
Well, they have issued a general ban on protests right on the day last week when Ekrem Imamoglu was taken from his home and detained. That protest ban has since been extended for another couple of days, not only here in Istanbul, but also in the capital Ankara, in Izmir on the west coast. And then the government has deployed thousands of police officers across Istanbul to set up barricades and block major roads, streets and squares. So this is, of course, meant to deter people. And then what we've seen happening in recent nights is often police clashing with protesters. Sometimes protesters are provoking the police. Other times it's the police trying to prevent protesters from marching or using pepper spray. And that is then causing violent clashes. These situations are often very chaotic, and it's difficult to say who started the fight. But the Turkish Interior Ministry said more than 100 police officers have been injured in recent days. But at the same time, we see lots of footage on social media of protesters who have been seriously hurt by these violent clashes. And then, of course, another means is, and that's the government is using those means, is limiting public transportation and internet censorship. Bandwidth has been throttled, so internet is very slow at times, and it's very difficult, even if you have a VPN client, to access social media platforms, YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp. And that's, of course, making communication more difficult for people, and it's making it more difficult for them to organize.
We know that 1,000 people have been detained since the protests began, according to the Interior Ministry. What's going to happen to these people?
Well, in the best case, I would say they were just detained and they're being released shortly after. But in the worst case, of course, they might be charged with offences such as disturbing or disrupting public order that carry jail sentences, possibly. And we have seen President Erdogan in recent days warning people against what he calls street terrorism. He said he wouldn't tolerate such actions. So he has clearly branded the protests as some form of criminal activity. So there is reason to believe that the authorities have been instructed to act tough on those protesters and to use all means necessary to disperse the crowds. And what I've noticed at the protests is that more and more people are now completely covering their faces because they clearly fear repercussions and consequences, legal consequences.
Julia, you've been reporting in Turkey for some time now. How significant or unprecedented are these protests? Where do you see this situation going?
Well, these are the largest anti-government protests here in Turkey in more than a decade. The last time President Erdogan was faced with such massive crowds was back in 2013 during the so-called Gezi Park protests. So this is definitely a threat to him. These are images that he doesn't want to see. But at the same time, we have Ekrem Imamoglu now behind bars pending trial. He was removed from his mayorship and he was the opposition's best hope to challenge President Erdogan's rule. The opposition is now trying to maintain a certain mobilization on the streets, and it remains to be seen whether they can do that. They have called for early elections because right now elections aren't scheduled until 2028. So it's pretty unclear how things are going to develop, but I do expect the protests to continue.
All right, that is DW correspondent Julia Hahn in Istanbul. As always, thanks, Julia.